Thanks for joining us for CBN News Watch. I'm Gary Lane. Today, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu explaining how Hamas is trying to divide the Jewish state and pointing to the evidence Israel has found of the Hamas plans. But Israel's ambassador to the United Nations says the country has to be strong. Here at home, a community in Georgia turning to God, prayer, and love for healing after a 14-year-old student kills 4, including 2 other students and 2 teachers in a school shooting. The hidden war in America on free speech. We'll hear from legal scholar Jonathan Turley on this unseen battle that could have enormous implications for our country's future. And people in the Pacific nation of the Philippines taking a stand for Israel. We'll tell you about the historical bond between the Filipino people and the Jews. Those stories and more today on NewsWatch.
This is CBN News Watch.
We begin in Israel, where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Hamas is trying to divide the Jewish state, which he says is going through days of horror, sorrow, and rage after the murder of 6 hostages. And he offered evidence of just how Hamas is trying to do it. Israel's ambassador to the United Nations tells CBN News the country lives in a tough neighborhood and has to remain strong to move forward. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl brings us that story from Jerusalem.
In a sometimes emotional press conference, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he's willing to negotiate to free the hostages, but making concessions to Hamas is a non-starter.
I'm willing to make a deal. I made one already, one that brought back 150 hostages, 117 alive, and I'm committed to return the remaining 101. I'll do everything I can to get them in. But leaving Philadelphia does not advance the release of the hostages.
He says he was already willing to make a deal earlier this year, but Hamas refused. And now the only thing that's changed is Hamas murdering 6 more Israeli hostages.
Now the world will seriously demand that Israel make concessions after this massacre? What message does this send to Hamas? I'll tell you what the message is. Murder more hostages, you'll get more concessions. That's not only illogical, it's not only immoral, it's downright insane.
The IDF released footage showing the shaft leading to the tunnel where the bodies of the 6 hostages were found. It was through a children's play area with stuffed animals and cartoon characters on the wall. Thousands of Israeli protesters have taken to the streets, demanding a hostage deal. But Netanyahu says that's part of a Hamas plan to sow discord, citing a document found in an underground command post outlining the terror group's strategy.
Push photos and videos of hostages, put it out in the media, because that creates enormous psychological pressure. Who's not affected by it? Second, increase psychological pressure on defense minister. Third, continue blaming Netanyahu. And fourth, claim ground operation will not release hostages.
Jeff Balaban of the American Center for Law and Justice told CBN News Israelis relate more like a family to one another, with all the emotion and bickering rather than a religion or a country.
This family is in anguish since October 7th. It's deep, it's unresolved, and unresolved anguish turns to anger often. And angry people are easier to manipulate. But the vast majority, whether they like Bibi or not, whether they supported Netanyahu or not, understand that right now there must be unity, and they are behind this unity government.
Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danone, told CBN News Israel must be strong to go forward.
We live in a very tough neighborhood. We have to be strong. We have to project our strengths. That is why, at the end of the war, Hamas will not be in Gaza. We will send a message to our enemies that we will fight back. We are determined to stay where we are and to build our beautiful nation.
Danone says Israel and the U.S. have strong ties that will remain.
The strength of the bond between Israel and the U.S. is based on values. That is why the bond will stay strong. We share the same values of freedom, democracy. We are fighting evil. The same forces that are fighting us today will fight the U.S. tomorrow. We thank the U.S. for standing with Israel, and we believe that with God's help, we will prevail.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Coming up, a community in Georgia seeking healing after a 14-year-old student killed 4 people in a school shooting Wednesday. We'll show you how some are turning to God, prayer and love when we come back. A 14-year-old will be charged with murder and tried as an adult after allegedly killing 4 people at his high school in Georgia yesterday. As CBN's Lori Johnson tells us, the community is turning to God for healing.
Last year, Colt Gray and his father were interviewed by authorities after the FBI received anonymous tips the boy threatened to commit a school shooting. Gray denied the accusation, and authorities had no probable cause to take action. Authorities say Wednesday Gray opened fire at Appalachia High School in Winder, Georgia, killing 2 14-year-old students, Mason Schermerhorn and Christian Angulo, and 2 teachers, Richard Aspinwall and Christina Irami. One student said the shooter, who rarely spoke, left her algebra class, then tried to get back in.
I saw students go back to open the door for him, and they backed away. I'm guessing they saw something, but for some reason they didn't open the door. And you just hear gunshots. There's about 10 to 15 of them at once, back to back. And then everyone just kind of ducks to the floor. And we all kind of sporadically crawl. We don't really know which corner to go to.
Students retreated to the football field where many formed a circle in the end zone, praying and holding hands.
I was scared. I had so much fear. Like, I'm still shaking.
I might not get to see my family again. I mean, my brother again. I was scared that he might not make it out.
Terrified parents rushed to the school, many already communicating with their children, one mom texting the Lord's Prayer to her daughter, others speaking by phone.
I said, son, please tell me you're joking. He said, no, Mom, I'm not joking. He said, they're shooting in the school, and the shooter is right across the hall from me.
Investigators are trying to determine how the shooter obtained an AR-style rifle, which he surrendered when confronted by an armed school resource officer.
Just coming together and healing the best way that we can.
Now the community begins to deal with the tragedy. Many came together for comfort and healing at a Wednesday night prayer meeting.
Praying over our schools, our students, and all of those things, and really just for a touch for this community that is obviously so broken after everything that's gone down. So
elsewhere Wednesday night, a candlelight vigil and more prayer.
May evil in all the world know that especially in this place this night, we say no.
Pastor Chad Mantooth telling CBN News it's just the beginning.
We have a wonderful community of faith here, tremendous churches that are right now beginning that process of how to help people through this and minister to people.
Pointing people to Scripture.
Life, the Bible says, is like a vapor, and we do not know how long we have, and we do not know when that life will come to an end in this physical body, but we do know that if we've trusted in Christ and we have salvation that is granted to us by grace through faith in Him, then again, our hope is secure.
Hate will not prevail in this county. I want that to be very clear and known. Love will prevail over what happened today.
Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Still ahead, my interview with George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley about the threats to free speech in America today. That constitutional guarantee is so important he calls it the indispensable right. And we'll hear why he says it's under assault right after this. Mark Zuckerberg's recent admission that Biden administration officials pressured Meta into censoring controversial content came of no surprise to analysts like George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley. Appearing on this week's episode of The Global Lane, Turley, author of the book The Indispensable Right, Free Speech in an Age of Rage, suggests by acknowledging Facebook blocked COVID-19 and Hunter Biden laptop stories, Zuckerberg exposed the truth about the anti-free speech movement.
It plays a critical role in what is an unprecedented alliance we have in this anti-free speech movement today of the government, corporations, the media, and academia. But Facebook was the big dog on the block. And for years, Zuckerberg and Facebook and Meta opposed efforts to release files on censorship. Now, so Elon Musk has been attacked unrelentingly after he released the Twitter files that showed this massive censorship system. But Facebook fought it. And what people need to understand is Zuckerberg's admission came only after the House Judiciary Committee forced him to release those documents. So for many of us who are critics, as I was in this book, it's less inspiring as it is insulting to see him saying he's so really, really sorry about censoring people.
Well, Facebook recently blocked the boosting of posts promoting the new Dennis Quaid movie about Ronald Reagan. Facebook said a handful of Reagan movie ads were incorrectly rejected. Then afterwards, clips were again rejected. So one of these ads featured President Reagan saying the country's best days are still ahead. So do you think this would have happened if a clip of Bill Clinton or Barack Obama making a similar remark was posted? What do you think?
I don't. And, you know, what I talk about in the book is that Facebook actually launched a commercial campaign to try to get American citizens to embrace censorship, which they like to call content moderation. And it was a really creepy campaign. It was an effort to appeal to younger people. And that was telling because, as the book talks about, we're creating a generation of speech phobics. These kids have been told their entire lives that free speech is harmful and it's triggering and you don't have to hear opposing views.
How did we get to this point? I'm sure you're discouraged by this.
Well, I am. You know, the book was an effort to try to understand why we're still struggling with free speech in this country. It looks at the personalities and the periods that have shaped our view of free speech. We all seem to agree that free speech is indispensable, but not why. And what I detail in the book is that at the beginning of our republic, we had a moment of clarity. The most revolutionary part of the American Revolution was the First Amendment. No one had ever published a statement like the First Amendment as the foundation of a government, that the government simply could not abridge free speech. That was revolutionary. It's still revolutionary. There's a movement to amend the First Amendment. It's being led by one of my colleagues who says the First Amendment is, quote, aggressively individualistic and that free speech should be balanced against equity. So even today, it's revolutionary. But as the book talks about, we lost that brief moment of clarity. Within a few years, the courts returned to what I call a Blackstonian or British view of free speech, that we protect it to the extent that it's good for democracy. But it's good for democracy. That's not really in debate, but it's more than that. Because what this book argues is that free speech is a natural right. That was how the framers viewed it when they wrote the First Amendment. They believed that free speech was a gift from God, that it belonged to you as a human being. It wasn't granted to you by the government. It's not tolerated by the government. The government has to protect it because it defines you as a human being.
Well, you have a chapter in the book about Holmes and Schenck shouting fire in a crowded theater. So what speech should be limited and who decides what should be censored?
Well, my hair catches on fire every time someone quotes that line. I testified in the House on censorship, and you know the Democratic members had changed their position. In my prior testimony, they said there's no proof of any coordination by the government. Then Elon Musk released the Twitter files, and then they said, well, we have to censor. We have to silence these voices. And one of them, Representative Goldberg, quoted that line and said, this is just people screaming fire in a crowded theater. And I said, Representative Goldman, you are familiar, aren't you, that line from Schenck was used to incarcerate a socialist who was opposing the war by passing around a flyer quoting the United States Constitution. Is that the line? Is that the case that you want to use as the standard? Because Holmes himself walked away from that, and the court walked away from Schenck. And the response of Representative Goldman was, we don't need a law lecture here, Professor. And I said, yes, I think you do. Right? I think that the problem with free speech is that every generation has to defend it. And this generation has never been more divided, as you noted, because they have been told that free speech is going to hurt them. You see, it's very hard to get a free people to give up freedom. They have to be really afraid or really angry. And that's what we're seeing. You know, the Washington Post just ran a column saying the First Amendment's out of control and is threatening your very jobs. It's an effort to make you so afraid that you're willing to make yourself less free.
Okay, the book is The Indispensable Right, Free Speech in an Age of Rage. Professor Jonathan Turley, thank you for sharing your time and insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And once again, Jonathan Turley's book is called The Indispensable Right, Free Speech in an Age of Rage. You can find it wherever books are sold. Also, on this week's episode of The Global Lane, more with Jonathan Turley on disinformation and the upcoming election, and a new type of potential future war that may bring America to a standstill. You can see it all on The Global Lane tonight on the CBN News Channel at 8 Eastern. You can also see it on the CBN News app or on YouTube. Coming up, support for Israel is worldwide. We're going to take you to the Philippines, where people stood up for Israel earlier this year because of a long-time historical bond between the Pacific nation and the Jewish people. We'll have that story for you up next. In the Philippines, supporters of Israel rallied earlier this summer on behalf of the Jewish state. The support stems from a historical bond that began in 1937, when the Philippines accepted more than 1,000 Jews during the Holocaust. CBN Asia correspondent Lucille Toulousan brings us that story.
We decree and declare your word in Zechariah chapter 2, verse 5, that you will be the walls of fire surrounding Israel and the Philippines.
Church leaders took turns praying in front of the Israeli embassy in Metro Manila to launch the movement, Israel, You've Got a Friend.
This is the first Filipino public rally to show the Philippine support for Israel and to counter the rising anti-Semitic campaigns and rallies that's happening all over the world.
Friends of Israel, including Filipino church leaders and government officials, also recently showed their support, celebrating the country's 76th Independence Day. Israeli ambassador to the Philippines, Ilan Flus, highlighted its resiliency in the face of the ongoing war and the disturbing surge in global anti-Semitism.
Instead of focusing on those atrocities that happened on October 7, we have chosen to highlight a message of resilience, of heroism, and of hope. Our unwavering determination to rebuild and revive our communities.
The ambassador commended the 28,000 Filipino workers in Israel who remained with their employers on October 7th when it was dangerous, as 4 even lost their lives. This also served as a testament of the historic relations between the two countries. In 1937, the Philippines welcomed 1,200 refugees who escaped the Holocaust. And in 1947, the Philippines became the only Asian country to vote for the establishment of Israel as a nation. This mutual bond also continues in the relationship between the Israeli embassy and Operation Blessing Philippines. Through the years, it has supported various OB humanitarian projects such as medical missions and disaster relief operations. That includes sending a Filipino team to Israel at the height of the war with Hamas to provide care packages, food, and trauma counseling.
We are here for the long term, echoing the promise made by our founder, Dr. Pat Robertson, as he stood on the Mount of Olives when he said, whatever happens, CBN will stand and be in support of Israel.
Ambassador Flus also made this worldwide appeal.
I call you to support Israel. I call you to express this support over social media, have public activities and public events.
While rally participants may be small in number, they have helped tell Israel's story while also remembering the remaining hostages by releasing 120 balloons to signify hope and prayer for their safe return. Lucille Talusan, CBN News, Manila.
That's it for this edition of CBN Newswatch. Remember, you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel anytime or online with cbnnews.com. Also, tell us what you think about the stories you've just seen by emailing newswatch@cbn.com or talk to us on Facebook, Instagram, and X, which is formerly known as Twitter. We hope you'll join us next time. Have a great day.